What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Gooner channel, a channel 100% dedicated to the Arsenal, who, if we're honest, can be a very difficult team to support at times. Our performances in Europe tend to be, at best, frustrating and at worst, just downright unwatchable. Yesterday, look, we went to Porto and we seemed to go there with the intention of keeping the ball, snuffing the life out of the game, and it seemed like we were okay with coming away with a draw, which we would have done had it not been for a really great goal at the end. But the reality is that our tactics and strategy didn't work. There were so many players. In fact, I can't think of any player who really stood out for a good performance. Yes, the referee was shocking. Yes, Porto played a niggly game and were disciplined and well-marshalled and didn't allow for us to be as creative as we'd like to be. But as a team looking to win a Champions League, you can't hope that the other team lets you play the way you want to. This season in the European competition, when teams have come at us and tried to attack, we've torn them apart. And this Porto side wasn't likely to do that. After the match, when Arteta was interviewed, I thought it was magnanimous. He did say, look, Porto have had the best chances. But he said that he sort of intimated that he didn't feel that Porto had come to play. And Conceição, when he was interviewed after the match, said, Arsenal came to play, we came to win. And that's what they did. Two prize fighters, one jabbing and moving really well without really landing any major hits, and the other waiting until the moment presented itself before delivering a knockout blow. Now, in this case, I don't really think it is going to be a knockout blow, but it could have a huge impact on our season, this game. Because we went to Porto on the back of great performances away, swashbuckling, goal scoring, getting the job done early, being able to swap players out. And yesterday was back to that sort of mini blip we had, and particularly that performance away to Fulham where people just looked tired. Saka looked tired. Martinelli, arguably his worst performance. Across the pitch, there weren't really any strong performances. Jacob Kivior, who'd been playing much better, once again looked out of sorts. And I don't really blame David Raya for that goal, and he didn't have a lot to do. But when one or two players just aren't at the races, you've got to look at that and say, okay, well, to some degree that's on the manager for not replacing them or for starting them. But when it's the entire team, I think we have to look at it and say there is some naivety. Now, I'm an advocate of Arteta. I'm very pleased with how far he's brought us, but we are reminded at times like this that he lacks the experience. I think when it came to setting the team up and sending them out, many times last season, we were too energised, we were too up for it, and we gave away silly goals. We've eliminated that to a great degree from our game, but we've replaced it with a kind of turgidness, an inability to really grab the game by the scruff of the neck or to let some of our flair players loose. When I watched it, and this may be unfair as a criticism, but it felt a bit like the players were doing what they were told rather than what felt right. And there was no plan B, and there was no different way of playing that we were going to come up with. At half-time, I still felt confident, but I'd like to have seen us go for the jugular a little bit. And we certainly didn't do that. Now, when it comes to the lineup, I had some concerns, but I don't want to be one of those guys who's smart after the event. I looked at the lineup before we started and thought, you know what? Fair enough. Part of my concern was, has Arteta done this because he doesn't want to be accused of throwing away the Champions League, like by rotating players when, you know, the players he had on the pitch had done so well against Burnley. And of course, Burnley is a different proposition to Porto, as are West Ham. I was happy to see that we put out full strength side, but I had been hoping that we would see some changes, rest some players, use some of the players available on the bench. Of course, finding out that Thomas Partey wasn't fit enough, which is kind of predictable. Jesus, Zinchenko and Tomiyasu weren't ready. Really restricted the changes we could make. I mean, I don't want to be facetious, but when you're picking our back four at the moment, you're picking the only four players you can play in that position. But up front, We could have played Kai Havertz further advanced. We could have played Trossard on the left. I thought Tom Canton on the Gooner Talk show that morning had made a really good point. He said, maybe this is a game where you put Martinelli on the bench so you've got something to bring on. But this takes me to one of the criticisms of Arteta. The last season when he didn't use players off the bench, Kieran Tierney, Emile Smith-Rowe, you kind of felt like it was because he just didn't have faith in them and he needed to strengthen and augment the squad. And we have done that this summer, but he still doesn't trust the bench. There wasn't any rotation. I can kind of forgive that. Maybe there weren't players to rotate in. But looking at it, when it's clear that Martinelli's having the kind of game he is, it's worth remembering that Emile Smith-Rowe, when he broke into the team and saved Arteta's career at Arsenal, he was doing it on the left. In fact, the left is one area we definitely have options. So that nothing happened there. The substitution of Jorginho for Trossard, for me, just looked exactly what it was. It was like, right, great, we'll take a point out of this. Being too clever. Relying too much on the home leg. We saw this with Sporting last season. I was really pleased with a 2-2 away draw. Thought we'd walk over them at the Emirates, and then he didn't quite pick a full-strength squad and he didn't quite pick a second-string squad, and it was a miserable game. And I'm praying we don't see that again with Porto. But what is Reiss Nelson doing on the bench if he can't come on in a game like that and just throw a little bit of caution to the wind? We yesterday were up against a 41-year-old defender. Martinelli, theoretically, should have had the run of that game. Somebody should have done. How you can not have a single shot on target when they're playing someone in the back four that's older than your manager? We have to look at that. We have to look at the way we set up. I like the difference in our game this season that's made us more difficult to beat defensively. I like that we now control games better, but the plan B has to be go at them, go after them, take shots, meaningful shots, try something, go past your man. But beyond all that, you also have to win your duels, and we weren't doing that. And the sloppiness is frustrating. Could be nerves, could be anxiety. I said it in the live stream that we did yesterday. Often when we go away to these environments, Lens, the crowd played its part. Newcastle, the crowd played its part. Aston Villa, the crowd played its part. We seem to struggle a little bit with the emotion of the evening and played a little bit within ourselves. And not cowardly is the wrong word, but certainly with an element of fear, when actually in cup competitions it's fearlessness that counts. So I would say, look, Arteta is a young manager. I've managed a lot of teams in my life, not sports teams, it's worth saying, but when it's your job to get them up for the event, to make sure they're giving their absolute best, sometimes you think you've done a good job of that and then results prove otherwise, and you learn from that and you adjust. And I think at the very least, if you're not winning, you have to be learning, and I'm hopeful that we've learned something. But surely one of the things we have to be looking at as a team is it's not good enough going on about our injuries. Liverpool have injuries, Man City have injuries, every team's got injuries. We have to start looking at the fact that there are players who are just not getting used at all. Fabio Vieira was on the bench, and today I read with interest that Jorginho was talking about what a great player he is, and fine. I've yet to see it myself, but I don't train with the guy. If Reiss Nelson, Eddie Nketiah, Emile Smith-Rowe, if none of these guys are ever going to play, then we do need to go out and sign 6 or 7 players. And since that's not really realistic, I think it's time for Arteta to throw a little bit more caution to the wind. He can be too unwilling to make those brave decisions, to trust players. When you see some of the other young players, 16, 17, now maybe we don't have anyone as good as the young players that are starting to come through. Kobe Mainu, Man United is another one. Maybe we don't, but we're never going to have if you don't give them a chance. I think that the final thing I want to talk about is something that came up in the live stream. And for all of those of you rational, reasonable people who can put this game in context and admit that it was a really disappointing performance from us. But yesterday, Sean and I were challenged by somebody who came on and said this performance was a disgrace. And I think that is baffling to me. It was a disappointment, but it wasn't a disgrace. It's still half time in this tie. if every single time you lose a game anywhere in the world, whether it's to former Champions League winners or First Division FA Cup opposition, if that's always a disgrace, then as a team we are going to be in disgrace. The only team in my memory to not have lost a game in the Premier League in anyone's memory is the Invincibles. But even then, we went out to Wayne Bridge, and Chelsea's defeat of us in the Champions League still smarts to this day. I thought we had enough about us to go on and win it. We lost the Champions League final. It wasn't a disgrace. Defeats like this are not a disgrace if you learn from them. If we go through against Porto and we do the same thing against another team and complain that they're not playing proper football, they're not here to play, I think Conceição's final words on this will be my final words. It's not about turning up and playing. It's not about how much possession you have or field tilt. It's about how many goals you score and how few you concede. And we didn't do that right yesterday. It felt like we were trying to be too clever. We thought we'd done enough, and in the end we hadn't. It is only half time, but you have to look now ahead to the Newcastle game. The players will be travelling back today. They'll have one day of, I imagine, not particularly strong training before an 8 o'clock kickoff on Saturday. And are we going to see exactly the same players again? Is there a chance that we're going to see some rotation? Is Jesus going to be able to play? Zinchenko or Tomiyasu or something to inject a little bit of something different and rest some of these players? Is it conceivable that in any of the games coming up, Bukayo Saka won't be asked to start, Declan Rice won't be asked to start, Saliba won't be asked to start? Our first 11 is having to play all the time, whether we're home or away, and I don't think that's the right strategy going into the end of the season. The reason Man City are always fit at the end of a season, typically, although I don't think they look that good at the moment, is because they don't give their players as many minutes in the run up to this. They keep themselves relatively fresh, and I don't think we're doing that right now. We get a chance to bounce back against Newcastle. I will, of course, do a video about that, looking ahead to how we could line up. But I want to hear from you. Do you feel that it was a disgrace? Are you angry? Has this upset you? It's half time. But do you see us going through? I still do, particularly without away goals counting. And frankly, that's another debate I'd quite like to get your feedback on. I think I might do a video on it. Scrapping the away goals. I'm thrilled they're gone. They never made any sense to me. And as far as I could see, they only ever ruined football. But are we going to regret the fact in later rounds? We're certainly not in this round because we didn't have one to count. But are we going to go through against Porto? How do you feel about the chances in the league? Are we this kind of fan base? I hope we're not. I know that most of you watch this channel are rational, reasonable people and your emotions don't swing like a pendulum. But let's be honest, that was a really disappointing performance. What does it mean for the rest of the season? I want to hear from you. Let me know in the comments how you felt, how you feel and what you think. And thank you so much for subscribing, if those of you have, and hitting like. If you haven't hit like right now. And until I see you again, be lucky. Lots of love.